Okay. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Thank you so much to everybody who has clicked on this video. I am very grateful and honored to be hosting a gentleman who I met around a year ago now. How quickly time flies. A brother from Manchester, England, a fellow revert and content creator. So a link will be in the description box down below for his YouTube channel, Sulaiman Speaks. You can obviously guess that our brother is called Sulaiman. I'm going to pass it over to him really quickly, and then we're going to just get into a really casual, chilled conversation about what it means to be a British Muslim revert, the challenges, the tests, and the beauty of Islam. And inshallah, give a little bit of dawah to those who are agnostic slash atheist slash spiritual who are joining us today for this conversation. So over to you, good sir. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Akhi Suleiman.
Walaikum salam. What an introduction. That's um that's just a lot of food for thought. Just the introduction in and of itself, us being reverts, and I'm sure your viewers, your audience, right? They're fully aware of kind of your circumstances, your hijrah, your move to Egypt. It's something that we kind of touched upon a little bit in the introduction, but as reverts, right, it's something that I'm only kind of friends. I've only got a handful of good brothers who are reverts here in Manchester, and obviously the rest of my entourage, let's say, is born Muslims, right? But there's just that connection, right? That additional connection with reverts where it's you kind of moving to Egypt right now, learning Arabic, those doors that are opening up for you, right? It's I can't quite put it into words, but based on the conversations I have with born Muslims, let's say, when you kind of describe to them those who are sincere, those who are really intent, right? The world and your story and kind of your perspective of the world now, going from, let's say, atheist, agnostic to Muslim, they're fascinated. They're fascinated and they're fascinated with your perspective and they're fascinated with your journey, and it puts things into perspective for them. And kind of where I'm going with all of this, brother, is kind of watching your content right now, seeing what you're doing, and that's basically where I want to take my channel, inshallah, in that direction of just sharing your journey of Islam, right? It's just the incremental ways in which, one, it changes your life, and two, the way that it opens up the doors of perception. Let's say it really is step by step. It's you learn a little bit of Arabic here, you learn a little bit of Quran here, you learn about the sirah, the journey of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the Sahaba. It's just piece by piece by piece by piece. But as a revert, as a fully grown like male adult in your mid 20s, rediscovering it in this childlike way, brother, because it's it's like so many of the brothers I know have known this since they're six, they're six, they're eight, they're nine, even younger, right? So it's like this childlike awe that we're blessed with as reverts, and it's just amazing, bro. So I love it, and it's step by step too, really like children almost, because you'd be inundated with just too much information, right? If it was just thrown into the deep end, this is what you need to learn. Like basically open up the Quran and start memorizing it right now. No, it's incremental, it's step by step. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows when you're ready to introduce you to a new topic, to introduce you to this, to introduce you to that. And that journey, brother, it's it's one of the reasons why every single week you learn something new about the deen and you fall more in love with the deen, right? It's beautiful. So yeah, that's kind of obviously the content that you create, right? Kind of the content that I create, and it's one of the reasons why I did the content creation. I don't know about you. I just love to talk about this stuff all the time. And it's not as if I could talk about this all the time with friends and family, right? They want to talk about football, they want to talk about work, they want to talk not to there's a time and place for everything, but I am definitely one of those guys who could just talk about this endlessly, won't shut up about it. And at one point, everybody else around me is like, okay, we've had enough of this.
That's exactly it, mate. It's the fact that you can use the modern miracle of this technology to broadcast your thoughts to, you know, effectively endless number of people. More and more people are coming to the internet every single day as the third world becomes more and more advanced and more people get access to the internet. And actually people listen because, like you say, there's a bit of eye rolling with friends and family, and it can actually have the adverse effect. Dawah, it needs to actually be to the right person, the right time, whose heart is open and ready. And I also think that as a Reaver, our journey is, inshallah, is going to be a long one. Like, I really look forward to the point in my life, if Allah wills me to live this long, where I would have been Muslim longer than being non-Muslim. At that point, I'll be my parents' age. You know what I mean? I'll be 50 odd. And it's throughout that time when, inshallah, I raise my kids on the deen, and their grandparents see them as really, like, children with adab, with manners, with decorum, and they start to think, and their little grandkids are saying, granddad, you know, why don't you believe in God? And it's like it's hitting them in a different way. So sometimes our future, our kids, our own development in the long term can be a great way to kind of make people more curious in the deen, rather than us just sort of running our mouth, oh, this is the new trend he's on, let it calm down. But I'm going to ask a few questions. So first and foremost, I loved the reference of Doors of Perception. I don't know if you've read the book by Aldous Huxley, but this is kind of a really worthwhile read, I think. It's not Islamic scripture, but for those who are interested, it kind of opens the mind to altered states of consciousness and the awareness that what we are experiencing in this really thin bandwidth of, like, the material world is clearly not all there is. So that's the atheist, secular scientist folks out the window. There's more than meets the
Right.
eye. There's angels with us. Get with the program.
Right.
But I guess I just wanted to ask you this question, because I don't want to go rambling on too much. Is Could you please share with the viewers of this video your life before Islam? You grew up in Manchester. At what age did you embrace Islam? What were your influences, your family, your environment, and so on?
Okay, so I embraced Islam. I'm in my mid-20s now. When I was 23, so again mid-20s-ish. So obviously there was quite a lengthy period where I wasn't Muslim. In fact, I was very much in the agnostic atheist camp, even though I do have a Christian upbringing. But I'm sure, as you know, it's the tradition, the culture here in England, although we may be baptized and raised, going to Catholic school, and have Christian Catholic parents or families, we do subscribe very much to an atheist agnostic perspective. It's Christmas, it's Easter, it's all there's the celebrations, there's the festivals, there's the holidays, but God uh, is not in the picture. So that was kind of my upbringing. I was kind of free to believe what I wanted, effectively, right? And I just defaulted, I would say, to what everybody else kind of subscribed to until my mid-teens. And what that was yeah, an atheist perspective on life, right? More of a I don't I don't discuss those kind of topics anyway. It's there's no point of delving into religion. Religion is outdated. There's no point of having these discussions or these topics. I'll delve into these topics. There's more to life than that. That was kind of the ideology up until my mid-teens, and then I stumbled across kind of the new age spiritualism, very much fascinated. Just a group of us, right? Me, friends, my friends at college. Effectively, we became very much interested in Eastern philosophies, Eastern religions, the Buddhism, the Hinduism. There was definitely a trend there as well, right? And that was the beginning of the search, right? That was the beginning of the journey of, whoa, the doors of perception, like you just mentioned. There is definitely more to life than what I was raised with. That is a narrow bandwidth of looking at the world. There's all these different philosophies and perspectives, right? Ancient people way smarter than me, way more brilliant than me, who've been contemplating and writing and having discussions about this stuff thousands of years before us and our generation and this culture, this modern culture. So delving into that world was an absolute eye opener because, like I was saying, I was simply never exposed to that kind of stuff growing up at all. And that was my late teens. Spent a long time exploring Buddhism. I genuinely thought, this is the direction that I'm going to take in life. I'm going to become a Buddhist. And what it there was something about Buddhism that was missing. And the people that I got myself involved with these Eastern traditions with, we kind of broke apart, went our separate ways. I was left alone, right? In the sense that I had nobody around me who was on that search, that what are we all doing here kind of thing. It was just me, myself, and I. So everything fell by the wayside. And then, brother, what happened? I had my daughter, right, in my early 20s. And as a father yourself, you just know that's a life-changing experience, right? A life-changing experience. And it put everything into perspective for me in the sense of priorities. I'm going to become, this was before she was born, right? But when I found out, I was just thinking to myself, like all the little hopes and dreams that you have, if they're not, if you don't have your dad hat on, if they're not for the grander goal of providing for your child, they just all fall by the wayside, right? At the end of the day, if my goals and my dreams and all this kind of stuff is not going to basically provide for my daughter, that can fall by the wayside. I'm just going to focus on this for now. So that was my focus. And alongside that, though, I was thinking to myself, this was finally a point in my life where the question of values came up, and I suppose culture. And I was just thinking to myself, well, like the values that I have, my family, they're kind of the Christian values, basically. Is that something that I want my daughter to have? Is that something I want my daughter to embrace? Effectively becoming a father, put that into perspective of, well, how am I going to raise this child? What are they going to believe? What are they going to do in life? Are they going to be raised like me? And I thought to myself, well, I definitely don't want that. I don't want them to have to experience that agnostic, um, the Friedrich Nietzsche God is dead perspective on life, right? That's all outdated. We're on to bigger, better things. I didn't want my daughter to be raised with that mindset because it led me to a lot of trouble, let's say, right? It led me to a lot of trouble in life. And so that experience just it put things into perspective, and I kind of returned to Christianity. I started going back to church, started to just spend time with more family members who are devoted, right? And I generally thought, yeah, I'm going to become Christian. These are the kind of values I would want my daughter to be raised with, right? The not drinking, the respecting parents, the I suppose, yeah, being obedient towards parents, not drinking, that party culture, that party lifestyle, all that kind of stuff, right? I would say it's complete degeneracy, but then people say that I'm radicalized, right? When I say that kind of stuff, but to me, it is quite degenerate in the sense of the morality, right? The morality, I would say, is quite low, if that's the best way of putting it, or it's just not something I would want for myself and not something I would want for my daughter. And obviously, Christianity is opposed to that lifestyle in many, many ways. So that's why I thought, yeah, I'm gonna definitely, return to what I was born with, I suppose, and this is how I'm gonna raise my daughter. And and then I finally met the Muslims. Then I finally, because in all of this and in what I'm saying, brother, I wasn't raised with any Muslims. I didn't go to school. There was no Muslims there. I was never exposed to Islam. So it was at this point that I finally started spending time with brothers. And you know what brothers are like? They like to give dawah. They like to, it's none of those kind of superficial conversations for the most part with brothers. They really like to get into well, what do you believe? What do you think about life? Do you believe in God? And I love those kind of conversations. So when I finally met Muslims and I was able to have those kind of conversations, it was great, and it very much opened the doors for me, and that was my exposure finally to Islam, and I just started to take it a little bit more seriously. One thing led to another, obviously, over the course of a year. But I met these brothers. They gave me a bit of dawah. I kind of did my own independent research, and then over the course of the year, I was, yeah, as I was blown away. I was blown away by the knowledge that I discovered in the religion of Islam, and I finally had to commit. I finally had to say that Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I had to say it, brother. I had to say it.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. That That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, you know, you've said there that you were blown away by the ocean of knowledge that is present in the Deen of Al Islam. Even though it's incredibly simple, it's incredibly deep. So that's something that I think is quite amazing. But how did you decipher and distinguish between the beauty, the truth, the wisdom, the depth of knowledge, and the misconceptions, the propaganda, the problems that are being pushed by the media?
Fantastic question, because that narrative was something that I had to unpack. And it's one of the reasons why I think I did explore every single world religion, not every, but the major ones, right? Besides from Islam, because of that narrative, right? I thought that if I'm going to subscribe to a religion, if I'm going to find the truth, right, it's going to be here, 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 but not Islam. It's not going to be there. I'm not going to find it there. And obviously, after taking Shahada and becoming a Muslim, and let's say after 6 months or a year or so, this is only something I could put into perspective now and understand is when you're raised as I was, and as many of us are in the West, you might relate to this, is if your exposure to Islam is simply what you've heard on the news, your understanding of Islam and the way you view Muslims, quite frankly, is not good. It's not going to be a good perspective. You're simply going to think, again, as somebody who never looked into Islam, never opened a book, never attended RE. There was no religious studies in my school, actually. So we didn't really, there was no exposure to Islam whatsoever, besides from what I heard on the news and maybe, family members and stuff. You view Islam as simply an outdated religion. An outdated religion is something of the past. We've moved on to bigger and better things. That's the narrative that you have. And then also, there's another side to it, which is associated with, the violence and all that kind of stuff. So you simply think to yourself, yeah, it's an outdated religion. It's more of a violent religion, right? It's more of a patriarchal religion, right? It's one that's it's designed by men for men, right? That's the perspective that you have when you don't peel back the surface level narratives of Islam. So that was that these are the beliefs that I held, and this is something that I had to unpack as well. But Alhamdulillah, that barrier, let's say, to the religion faded very quickly because the people I met, the brothers I met, were lovely. And you could just tell they were just genuine brothers, right? So immediately it's like meeting going to a different part of the world that you've never been to. You meet just a different kind of people, right? Obviously different customs, different beliefs, and maybe you grew up believing that this side of the world they just act in a certain kind of way, right? That's the beliefs you hold, and then you go and you travel to that country, you meet those people, and they're just lovely. Immediately, those that narrative that you grew up with believing about those people is just going to shatter. It's always a case of when you hear stuff about a certain person, you can believe whatever you want to believe, but then when you meet them and they're different, it really is just going to shatter that perspective you have of them. So that whole narrative, yes, it's definitely something that I had towards Islam. But then as soon as I met these brothers and as soon as I started going to the masjids, you're familiar with the masjids, obviously around here in Manchester, just the people I met, they genuinely wanted to help, right? They genuinely, and also they were legitimately concerned about the hereafter, right? And my hereafter. And I could tell they were concerned. They could tell I was interested and in the religion, and they were also concerned about my afterlife, quite frankly. And having those kind of conversations with people who are that sincere, immediately all of those narratives that you have about Islam just kind of go out of the window. But it was there in the beginning, that's for sure.
Amazing. Thank you. Great answer. So, as a result of embracing Islam, obviously, I know it's a big question, but how did that affect your life, change your life in both practical ways, and then also, those perspectives that many people hold that you held yourself? I'm sure that colleagues, friends, family, their perspective didn't change. It stayed the same. So now they're thinking, yo, this guy's sort of working outside the box. So yeah, how did embracing Islam kind of, take me through perhaps, telling some people their responses, work, family, friends, all that kind of stuff?
For the most part, immediately, the first thing I have to say is that they probably thought it was a phase. And still to this day, I think some of them suspect it's a phase. And I'm going to show up one weekend and be like, yeah, I'm not Muslim anymore. Like, that was just, do you know what I mean? I do think there's some family who think that. But, the reason being is because, like I was saying, for years prior to that, I was interested in different religions, right? And I always discussed that with, friends and family. I'd say to them, did you know this about Buddhism? And, this is what I found kind of in the, I don't know, the ancient scriptures of Hinduism, like the Vedas and stuff like that. And I'd share it with them. So they knew I'm that guy in the family, right? Who's just a little bit weird, right? So their reaction when I told them was varied because I do have a side to my family that's not religious whatsoever, and I have a side to my family who I would say is quite, religious, Catholic, Christian. So there was some variety there. And for those who were more religious, their concern was, well, now that you subscribe to, Islam, how are you going to receive, the love of Jesus Christ, and how are you um what about you going to heaven and all this kind of stuff? Now that you subscribe to a different religion, effectively, now you're going to hell. And that was the immediate conversation I had to have with that side of the family. But the other side of my family, they were just like, yeah, we support you. Like when you get married, we want to go to an Islamic Muslim wedding. Like that's that's their way of thinking about things. But yeah, I suppose the Christian side to my family, it was a little bit more complicated. And obviously, when you enter into the religion, you don't have too much knowledge, right? The religion of Islam, but one thing that you are aware of is the similarities between all the Abrahamic religions. So the best way I can put it is my Christian family, the Christian side of my family wanted to focus on the differences, whereas I wanted to focus on the things that we had in common and really highlight and show them that yes, there are some fundamental differences obviously between Islam and Christianity, but they're not as big as you think. And having that conversation with them, and over time I had to break down. They're still a little bit skeptical, but one of the most important things that I had to address was the narratives, the media, the news narratives that they had of Islam, right? Like, oh, well, are you now gonna have six wives, and are you gonna beat them and all this kind of crazy stuff, right? I had to have those conversations with them, and you know, like literally point to the Quran and like say to them, like, where does it say it in here? This is not what we believe, right? This is generally what you've heard on the media, on the news, and it's simply untrue. And then also have the conversation with them about the differences between what is Islam, our religion, and culture. And different cultures around the world, and unfortunately, they have been muddled together, right? Culture and Islam, but there is a clear distinction, there's a clear separation, and perhaps some of the problems that you have seen in the news and the media is more of a cultural thing that is painted with the brush of Islam, right? But there is a separation. So having to have that conversation with them, I mean, still to this day is interesting, right? It's still very much prevalent. And now because it's been what, a year and a half, I think for many of them, they can see the commitment from me, so they don't necessarily want to raise the topic anymore or have a discussion. And I'm trying to figure out exactly why that is, but I do think it stems from the fact that they can see I'm committed. I believe, like, and they can also see how it has improved my life, right? So because they witnessed that, they know they're not going to be able to convince me out of it, right? So now it's just, yeah, it's something that we don't address or talk about as much. But there was varied reactions, and I do have a couple of family members, such as my grandmother, just before the Christmas break, she asked for a copy of the Quran actually. So she's becoming more interested, alhamdulillah, which is good to see. So only Allah knows, right? But who knows what could happen there? But it's a step in the right direction. But yeah, there was lots of different reactions, and I think you may have experienced this yourself, right? It was just dealing with again what the image Islam has in the news, in the media here in the West. Dealing with that, addressing that is the only challenge, is the only issue.
Mm. Yeah, 100%. No, I can relate to that as well. What do you think your family members would say in relation to the positive changes that they have seen? Because now the dust has settled, I think that's actually a good thing. Now it's kind of it's accepted, things are a little bit more calm, and now you enter a new phase of like your journey as being a Muslim and inshallah giving dawah to those closest to you. It's been accepted, it's been normalized, and now they can just really see the fruits of Islam in your life. What do you think they would say that they have seen in you in relation to change because of the Dean?
I would say that I've become, and they would say I've become much more involved actually in my family life, to be honest, because prior to Islam, and especially after becoming a dad, right, you get into the mindset of work culture, the 9 to 5. I've got to make effectively make as much money as I can, and I have to effectively work becomes your entire life, and you start to sacrifice, relationships and all these other things to climb the corporate ladder, all that kind of stuff. That becomes the main focus. So that was my life for quite some time. And then after embracing Islam, that went out of the window because one of the first things I did was quit the corporate job after, becoming a Muslim because it just wasn't suited for me anymore based on my understanding of Islam and how much that job was taken away from me, if that makes sense. It was taking a lot of, I suppose, energy. It was taking a lot of my time away, even from my daughter, right? But that's the kind of mindset, again, I would say in the West, here in the UK, that is simply normalized. It's normal not to, spend that much time with your kids and all that kind of stuff because you got to work, like you got to pay the bills. That's the kind of mindset that we have here. And learning about the Deen, accepting Islam, again, is something else that it put that into perspective for me. And I realized I can't be doing that. And I became much more involved in family life. And they even said to me, it was sometime last year, last summer, I believe. It's like I've like Sulaiman, I've not seen you this much over the course of a month. I can't remember I've ever seen you this much. You're here every weekend. You're hanging out. You're making food. You're doing this. You're doing that. It's good to see you, and they could definitely see that was associated with me accepting the Dean. But the caveat there is that some of them don't really want to acknowledge it, right? Because I do have certain family members and certain friends as well that don't necessarily want to accept that Islam is what's made me a better person. They'd rather chalk it up to something else potentially, like, oh, he's getting older, he's becoming more mature, he's becoming wiser, and it's like, yeah, that's because I'm Muslim now, right? But they don't necessarily want to accept that. And you can see, right? You can see when whether it is friends or family or just people you meet when you give dawah, you can see people who are interested, you can see the people who are sincere, and you can see the people who it actually frightens, when you speak about the deen, when you speak about Islam, and you know, the Prophet peace be upon him speaks of this, right? And it's mentioned in the Quran, of course, that yes, there's people, and there always will be people who fear Islam and fear the believers, right? Who fear the deen. And unfortunately, that is something that I've witnessed in my family too. and it is an eye opener because I still can't exactly pinpoint what that is. Why do you fear it so much? Is it because of the good that it's brought in my life? Do you have a fear of the good that it could bring into yours? Do you have a fear that maybe Islam is the truth, but you can't embrace it? Like there's lots of questions that come up, right? That maybe people don't want to confront because, brother, when I accepted Islam, the first thing that, over the course of 6 months that I noticed is that when you when you focus on the deen, when you focus on strengthening your connection with Allah, when you focus on the hereafter, Islam is like a mirror, bro. It mirrors you, right? What you're capable of, how sincere you are. You know, when it's summer and the sun rises, at 3:30 or, 2:45 a.m., are you going to get up for Fajr prayer and go to the masjid, right? Are you going to be disciplined enough the night before to go to bed on time and all this kind of stuff? When you get involved with when you take that seriously, as we should be as Muslims, right? The blessing I think you have as somebody who didn't live that lifestyle, who transitions into now living that lifestyle, you see obviously how it affects you, and you see how it can very much bring the best out of you, and it just really becomes like a mirror. It shows you what you're capable of, and I think based on the dawah and conversations I have with people around me, including friends and family, right? It's that mirror isn't something, that reflection isn't something that they always want to see. I don't know if you like, if that's your experience whatsoever, bro. Like, what's dawah like for you? I suppose if you do give it to family members, it can be a tough one.
Yeah, giving it to, I think that's the big difference between one of the big differences between being a revert and being a born Muslim is not only your individual journey, like you say, like you've been raised hearing the Quran your whole life, you've been raised in and around the Aqidah, the theology, you understand how to do all these things that we had to, we had to learn how to pray. As a fully grown man, we had to learn Fatiha, we had to learn all of the basic points of Aqidah, of the creed. And that that's one thing. They experience Ramadan and fasting and all this stuff. But the big thing is the family, bro. Is when none of your family, the loneliness potentially for I say potentially most of the time the loneliness of a revert Muslim when it comes to, for example, Eid. We're not practicing the deen of our family. So we're not going to involve ourselves, or at least if we do, it's a tricky business in relation to Christmas and birthdays and Easter and all this kind of stuff. And so we're not at their celebrations, they're not at our celebrations. And that's like you say, that's a mirror, right? That's a mirror. You're thinking, yo, like I'm now separated from my family. So dawah to the family is tough. And those points in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about disbelievers, they're, I think, far more poignant and real to us because we only have to look at our closest in kin. And that's who Allah is talking about in that circumstance. So it's a big question, bro. And I really want to try and limit myself from waffling away as much as possible because I'm more interested in listening to you talk. But it's a really, really tricky one. And the kind of process that I'm unfolding now is a far more longer term dawah. Like I say, if I can have as many children as Allah wills and raise them on the deen, and for those to be model citizens, to have memorized the Quran. And how can I expect my children to memorize the Quran if I haven't memorized the Quran? I don't want to expect upon my offspring that which I don't expect upon myself. And so once they memorize, comprehend, and embody the book of Allah, then I think they can really radiate the beauty of Islam to my non-Muslim family. And inshallah, some of them will become Muslim. But
Inshallah.
I wanted
That's
to go on after you, sir.
that I was just gonna say, leading by example effectively. That's something that I realized a little bit too late It's I don't know if you had this experience, but it's once you take Shahada, you want to scream it from the rooftops, and you want as many people around you to take Shahada too, right? So in your juvenile, naive way of going about things, you want to just give dawah, right? Even though you have such little knowledge, you want to give dawah to everybody around you, and that's not the approach. It's leading by example, and that's first and foremost yourself, but the strategy you have there of with children, with your children, right? Raising them on the deen and them leading by example too, and the impact that has on people around you. Alhamdulillah. Obviously, yeah. Inshallah, that's something I want to work towards myself. You know what I mean? I think
Inshallah.
that is one of the best ways.
Inshallah. Inshallah. I think the point you make about the mirror, I really like.
Yeah.
And I think that also highlights the, it answers the question that you were asking in relation to why wouldn't people want to embrace a way of life that is nothing but beneficial? It's because of the difficulty in hormesis, right? People don't want to go to the gym. They don't want to get into the ice bath. They don't want to have difficult conversations. They don't want to look at themselves naked in the mirror because they're confronted with uncomfortable reality. And so that is basically the reason. It must be. That's the only reason. Obviously, there's everything is from Allah, and people have different influences, the whispers of the shaitan. But I think it must be a an attempt to fiercely hold on to freedom, because, like you say, Islam brings benefit through discipline. It brings reward through sacrifice. And so those people, they want to be their own God. They want to live their own deen, and they don't want to feel restricted by a load of silly practices from thousands of years ago that aren't even true. Astaghfirullah. Wow,
And
billah.
but no, of course, but that is exactly what they think of it. And brother, to it goes to show you the differences that we all have, right, amongst humankind. Let's say is that mirror, let's say that capacity, effectively to really get to know yourself, but the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Because it's not always good what's reflected back to you. It's not always great what you learn about yourself because you, especially again in the context of Islam and contrasting that with people who disbelieve, let's say, something that can be a difficult pill for them to swallow is the whole concept and idea of sinning, right? And that, oh well, what my lifestyle is sinful, but I enjoy that. It's that realization that, well, maybe the things that I do indulge in are effectively sinful, and admitting that to yourself again. Obviously not everybody wants to do that, but for me that fascinates me. That fascinates me because it's purely selfish in the sense that it's a great opportunity again for you to learn about yourself, for you to get to know yourself, and going down that road is something that I'm constantly doing, right? And something that has always interested me, even the ugly side. Not to say that it's easy, even the sides of yourself that you don't necessarily want to admit, but Allah knows, because Allah knows what's in your heart, right? The stuff that maybe goes on behind closed doors and all that kind of stuff that, again, we all sin, and we all have sides of ourselves that we go out into the public and we portray a certain image, but there's another side to us. And all of that, the whole mix, is what fascinates me, is what interests me. And I was having this conversation with one of my sheikhs actually. How does one actually get to truly know themselves if they're not Muslim, right? What journey do you embark on there? Because you're not going to find the answers, right? The answers is in our deen. The answers are found in the Quran. The answers are found in the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one, He's our creator, and He's the one who informs us about ourselves, right? And as someone who spent a long time, let's say, searching for those answers, you you end up like you were saying there, you end up creating your own dean, right? You end up creating your own dean, and you end up creating the answers yourself, and that's what you build your identity on. Your whole foundation is built upon not some book from 1,000 years ago, right? As we just said, that's outdated. You're never going to find the truth there. Religion's outdated. We're 21st century progressive, you know, liberal thinking men and women, I suppose, who believe we believe we can find our own answers. And if not, technology and the progression of technology will find the answers for us. And it's its whole other deed in and of itself. But it's what people in that camp, at least me and a lot of people around me, won't admit to themselves is that despite that being their dean, that way of thinking, there is a deep dissatisfaction with life, though. There's a deep dissatisfaction with life, this void that can only be filled with all of the haram stuff, right? The drinking, the all that kind of stuff. So no wonder people don't want to give it up because there's this it's a threat to the ego, right? It's a threat to people's ego, and the ego. You know all about this, right? It's built upon that foundation on and that foundation and creating your own deen, and Islam is a threat to that, quite frankly, because it annihilates it. It annihilates it. It humbles you and it puts you in your place, and it says, "What do you know about life? What do you know about mankind? Right? What do you know about where you was before you came to Earth and where you're going afterwards? What do you know about yourself and life?" Ultimately, Islam really points the finger at you in that sense, and it's not for everybody to embrace that, quite frankly. I just happen to be one of those weirdos, I'd say, who loves that stuff. I want those answers, and I want to, yeah, I want to embrace that as much as I
Mm.
possibly can,
Well,
inshallah.
it's inshallah. It's I can't give you the Arabic, but there's a hadith that comes to mind, something along the lines of Islam was a strange thing when it came in the final revelation of the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it will remain a strange thing until the end. And so it's a strange thing to be born into. It's an even stranger thing to convert to, because then
Right.
you have the separate challenges that come with that. I think we're really onto something with this kind of mirror analogy. It's and this like creating your own deen and the struggle, this and that's why I love Islam. I too, like yourself, was on a philosophical, comparative, religious study vibe, and like many disbelievers or people in the West who have been raised in Christian roots, you relate to basically Christianity and Buddhism. And of course, Buddhism is a part of a large kind of Eastern philosophy groups, and you have your Sikhism and your Hinduism and so on. But it's shocking to many people, like you said earlier, due to the propaganda narrative, that Islam is a deep spiritual tradition, and that to be able to confront yourself and overcome your ego, Islam is the antidote, is the hole that you are seeking to fill with all of the haram. But anybody who has delved into all of these futile attempts to satisfy their soul's innate desire, which is obviously to recognize Allah as the creator and to live, as much as possible on the straight path, they come to realize that, and this is just straight fact, brother, because when you look at all kinds of addictions that give the ego a short thrill, and we all know what these are in society, the seven deadly sins, right? Gluttony and lust, so on and so forth. You come to realize that, okay, you get your kick, you get your thrill the first time, the second time, the third time, the 10th time, the 50th time, the 100th time, you start to enter a slumber, a depression. And then it becomes an even bigger game of denial, because you don't even know how to get out. There's a recent interview I was listening to, because Russell Brand, you might have seen, has embraced Christianity in recent times.
Okay.
and famous actor and so on. And he was saying that addicts are incredibly religious. They religiously follow their addiction. And the
100%.
the only
Yeah.
thing that the only addiction that is valid and legitimate and worthwhile for this life and the next is Islam. I guess, forgive me for going on there. I want to get the ball back into your hands. So my question would be that yes, there is a spiritual confrontation in relation to that mirror, but there is also the practicalities of that. So, for example, the separation, the furqan, distinguishing between that which is right and that which is wrong, will lead people into having to change their lifestyle potentially radically depending on how they've already been living. And so you mentioned, for example, your job, and many people will know there are strict conditions in relation to how a Muslim should use their wealth, use their finances, how they should engage with other human beings. So, whether that be intimate relations, neighbors, so on and so forth. And I thought maybe I could pass the ball over to you and ask a question, moving it from that spiritual kind of intangible reflection to a more like, brick and mortar, real life finances, relationships, because now you can't go partying and, kiss girls and that, your head on the floor, lowering your gaze. That's a big change for a brother that's been raised in the degeneracy and let's be real, the pornographic world of the West that is being, unfortunately, massive. Like, this is something I don't want to get into too deeply, but let's be real, this is massively affecting every single community, including the Muslim community, certainly in the West, where, for example, in Egypt, pornography is illegal.
Right.
You don't want to get, and I think that's a pretty reasonable piece of legislation, of course, compliant with the Sharia. In the UK, the liberal type agenda says, oh, if you want to do that, even though it's funding and fueling a load of other awful practices, drugs, violence, sexual exploitation. No, you have the right to do that. That's a big difference, isn't it? Do we have a right to disobey Allah? Subhanallah. This is, may Allah is the only one that we can get any help from in that situation. If we think that we can just take rights that we don't have. But that was my question: the practical implications rather than those more spiritual type implications.
Well, that's with that in mind, and I believe Saudi Arabia has done the same thing with pornography and a few other, Muslim countries. But my understanding is one of the reasons they've done that and that piece of legislation has come into play is protection for children, for our children, right? And effectively acknowledging the damage and the consequences that has upon the younger population. And from a practical perspective, brother, going back to when I first became a dad, you know, the way that you're raised in the West to view women, brother, like when you have a daughter, that is your worst nightmare. That picturing that this is the world that your daughter could be raised in. This is basically the kind of people she could encounter. That's what makes you gravitate towards religion. That's what makes you look at Christian values and Islamic values, right? And say, that's how I want to raise my children. These are the people I want my children to be surrounded by. These are the kind of values I want them to have because, brother, 100%, you know, experienced all of that degeneracy, let's say, and very close to even when I was in the process of researching Islam, I still very much had relationships and all that kind of lifestyle going on. So there were sacrifices that needed to be made there, which was difficult, right? Because of how normalized you think those things are. That is that is the whole thing that I had to deal with in and of myself, and there was an attempt for me to, let's say, try and make the haram halal, right? Try and turn a relationship, let's say, into a marriage, right? And but that was difficult. That was difficult. It was difficult for my family to accept that because again, their whole perspective was like, why are you getting married? You're in your mid-20s. Marriage is outdated. Marriage is a scam. Or marriage is something you do when you're in your 30s and you've got the Mercedes Benz and the mortgage and the dog and all that kind of stuff. That's when you get married. But not when you're in your mid 20s. You've still got to go out there and have a load of fun. And do you know what I mean? They couldn't wrap their heads around it. So there was a lot of conflict on my family side of when I made the attempt, let's say, to try and turn a relationship into something halal, of oh he's now just reverted to this. He's one of those Muslims. He's reverted to the he's reverted to that religion from those Arabs out in the east over there, and now he's wanting to get married. He'll probably want a second wife anytime soon. Like, what's going on with this guy? And also, it was problematic on like that girl's side on her family too. So Allah knows best, right? It's something that I had to let go, and it was for the best. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners. Something else, inshallah, will come along eventually. But that was a big thing that I had to confront and deal with, was letting go of that. And in terms of my job and all that kind of stuff, I was just working an office job, a sales job. That was absolutely fine. It's a job that I still could have worked as a Muslim, but it was halal in that sense. So there's nothing that I had to give up there in terms of like drinking and all that kind of stuff and that culture prior to becoming a Muslim. It's something that I'd already given up, and it's one of the reasons why I gravitated back towards Christianity and Islam, obviously, because years prior to that. I'd already spotted and acknowledged that this is a problem, right? The drinking culture, obviously prevalent here in the UK, but within my family, that's a huge problem. I don't want to participate in that. Although I did, right? I came to recognize that that's a huge problem too. So I'd say the biggest thing for me was relationships, and in those early days, brother, having to just let go of that. But even female friendships, right? That's normalized, right? That's something that is standard in a relationship too, right? It's you can have your girlfriends, but you can also have all your girl mates and stuff, and but that's so problematic because the way I'm raised, brother, I don't know if it's the same with you, but it's so prevalent in British culture, in Western culture. It's like you might be in a relationship, but because you have all of these female friends, right? It just leads to like everybody like sleeping around. You cheat on this person, that person's like just cheating on that, and that's the culture. And bro, that's something I had to get obviously away from. And but in the early days of reverting, kind of letting go of all of that, I did think to myself initially, I was like, oh, this Islam, this Muslim thing is tough, bro. It's tough, man. Like because there was a very kind of I took a massive leap of faith taking my shahada because even though I'd researched Islam and all that kind of stuff, I knew what I was getting myself into in a sense. But that's different from what's going on up here, and then when you actually embrace it, and then it's like, well, I can't have these haram relationships anymore and call myself a Muslim. And it's not as if people around me, let's say the imam, who my local imam, nobody necessarily had that conversation with me in the sense of you must give this up, by the way. They were very much like, you need to take things slow, brother. Like, you've just become a Muslim. Like, let's just focus on the five daily prayers. It's not as if there was anybody around me, do you know what I mean? Like, pointing a finger saying, we know what you get up to. You shouldn't be doing that. No, there was none of that. It was more of an internal thing, right? And over time, it was accepting and realizing that, nah, I can't call myself a Muslim and be engaged in this and doing this or letting that go. There was a brief period where I thought maybe this is too hard, maybe this is not for me, maybe Islam isn't for me. But then, alhamdulillah, fast forward a few months after that, it's the best thing you could have possibly done for yourself. but it's a massive issue that we face as Muslim men, quite frankly, and just men, generally speaking, in the West, right? It's almost like propaganda. You just see it everywhere these days. It's the crisis of masculinity and what does it mean to be a man in the 21st century, right? It's a large part of it, I think, stems from obviously the relationship that we have with women and how normalized it is simply to just get into a relationship or for it to be non-committal, like the idea of committing to somebody for life. No, like that's god awful. No way would I, engage in that kind of stuff. It's Marriage is frowned upon, obviously here. It's much more of a liberal, much more of a yeah, have as much fun as you can, and actually the last thing you want to do as a guy is commit to anybody, right? That's the mindset that I think we have here as men, and I think that is hugely problematic because brother have to kind of letting go of that lifestyle and those relationships. And basically we all know, right, is as guys, one of our biggest weaknesses is women, right? Is the opposite gender. So letting go of all of that is difficult, but I think that is what gives you your masculinity. That is what makes you a man. Like the idea, it's almost twisted, it's almost backwards. The idea of if you're interested in pursuing a woman, right? Make it halal, brother. Commit to her, right? Go and speak to her dad. Introduce. You don't spend time with her one on one until you have your her dad's approval. That whole process, and once you do, you commit to her, and the intention is you committing for life, right? You commit to her, and she has rights, right? You're honoring her rights, all this kind of stuff. That idea of masculinity, well, to me, it's much more masculine, right? It's much more manly than this idea of like I can just do whatever I want and like basically be with whoever I want and the idea of commitment that's almost been flipped on its head in this day and age. It's that makes you what's the word these days? Is it a beta? It makes you a beta male. It makes you just like
Mm,
a lower class
mm.
type of guy,
The
right? The guy who
alpha.
wants to,
Mm,
yeah, the guy who wants to settle down. That's it, spot on. But the alpha, he's the guy who doesn't want to settle down and just goes out and does what he wants. And it couldn't be further from the truth.
mm.
It's the exact opposite, at least to me now. And obviously, as Muslims, like women have their rights. So I'd say that was the only kind of practical thing that I had to deal with. And I'm not with, the mother of my daughter anymore, but obviously we co-parent. So there's a bit of a Allah knows best, right? But there's a certain approach that I've got to have there, and because they're not Muslim, right? And they're not interested in Islam, at least her mum. So raising my daughter, co-parenting, and me having to the best of my ability, lead by example and represent the deen to her, that's been tough and is going to be tough. And all I can do is make dua, right, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He guides her, my daughter, and puts her upon the straight path. But that's a difficult one to navigate because I wouldn't say her mum is opposed to it, but she's not necessarily for it either. Do you know what I mean? And when I've had those kind of conversations, and like I remember one time I'm dropping her off, like the little one, and her mum's saying to me afterwards, like, why is she saying stuff like Inshallah? Why is she saying stuff like Alhamdulillah? I'm having none of that in my house, and it's like, oh, how am I gonna navigate this? Like, how am I gonna navigate this? It's a tough one, but like I was saying, that's where your tawakkul and your reliance upon Allah needs to come into play, right?
Bro, we've hardly scratched the surface. I'm
Right.
so happy to have had this conversation with you. Really grateful for your time. Inshallah, there would have been benefit for the people that come across this video. May Allah shower His blessings on you, your family, all your endeavors. Appreciate your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam, brother. Take care.
Take care, brother.